Good space time, y'all. In this episode of the Citizen Cosmos podcast, I am joined by Benjamin, aka Xylophonzi. He's the founder of Decentland, a tool for building decentralized communities, archive news, and Permacast, podcast storage protocol. Along with Benjamin, we discussed storage, development DAO tooling, decentralized frontends, the state of Web 2 and Web 3, and the adoption of the latter. We also spoke about interoperability and whether or not decentralization should be the end goal of everything.
Kind of felt uncomfortable about the fact that we were all about decentralization. Price is almost like a crutch for a project that might just be an EVM fork that can't offer anything else. Having your DAO discussions on Web 2 puts the transparency at risk. The incentives in Web 2 are anti-user. Social media is pretty much controlled by 5 or so companies, all of which use closed source, non-interoperable protocols.
Before we rock it off into today's podcast, here is a roundup of the latest news from the sponsor of this episode, Cyber. The Cyber Congress DAO has been primarily working on improving the Bostrom hub. This work includes testing of the contracts, new UI features, verification tools for on-chain governance, and polishing the Bostrom DEX, adding MEF protection, new web front, and bringing indexing of chain swaps. To try Bostrom, head now to oversib.ai. Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of the Citizen Cosmos podcast. Today I have Benjamin with me, the founder of Archive News and Decentland. I hope I pronounced them correctly. Benjamin, hi, welcome to the show. Did I?
Yeah, you did. Yeah, absolutely fine. Most people call it Decentland.
I almost said Decentraland, of course, but then I was like, nah.
Well, yeah, that's another one. No, you nailed it.
Benjamin, let's get the first thing out the way. I mean, I did say produce you as the founder of Archive News and Decentland, but please, could you elaborate a little bit on that? What do you do? What are you busy working on? Anything else you want to add and make like a cool introduction for me and for all of the listeners, please, if you can.
The backstory is that I kind of came into the Archive ecosystem off of a job where I was working in marketing and development, sort of 50-50 split between the two. And I sort of had met the founder of Archive 2 years before I left my day job to found Archive News. And he kind of said, well, if you want to leave your day job, then there's an opportunity to come and co-found Archive News, which somebody has already set a bit up on. So I was one of the first journalists previous to that in my previous jobs to cover Archive, before it had done a launch, before even mainnet launch. And I guess Sam being the founder of Archive, remembered that I'd been involved for quite a while. And so that was my first professional step, I guess, into the Archive ecosystem, kind of setting up a news source which would do long form articles on everything that had been happening in the ecosystem. Started then looking at how we can decentralize this, because honestly it was just a WordPress site that we felt, and we kind of felt uncomfortable about the fact that we were all about decentralization, but we were actually running this off of a super centralized, vulnerable site. And we realized that there are already other Archive-based CMSs like WordPress competitors like Mirror, but so we would go after podcasting instead. So we actually decided, let's make podcasting on Archive, and sort of spun out what we had built with Archive News, partially at least. Some of the team forked and went off to build Permacast, which was just a way to get your podcast onto Archive and then feed it off to any distribution source that you might need to, via an RSS feed, a really pretty simple offering. During that time, I was working with Darwin, who at the time was going through the initial proof of concept for Decentland. He originally needed somebody that wasn't afraid of getting on the phone with VCs to raise seed money. And so I kind of came on board as the person who will do the talking for Decentland. But in all of the talking and in all of the thinking and, telling VCs this and that angle, I realized, I really started to understand the product and was able to influence its vision, and joined as CEO shortly after that. Found myself being able to hand Archive News off to this core team that we'd built over the previous 18 months, which is now all running smoothly. Similar with Permacast, that has its own dedicated team. And now I would say 80% of my time is focused on building out Decentland, which started from a vision of how can we do decentralized social media pivoted to like, oh, wait a minute, like decentralized social media needs so much infrastructure. It needs like DIDs, it needs, cross-chain stuff to verify your identity, regardless of like which chain the DApp is on. And all of these kinds of pieces came, and we eventually, where we are now, sort of made this pivot to, well, we can be social infrastructure for dApps that want social elements in them. That could be like a DAO tooling thing, or it could be like, an NFT marketplace or whatever like that. Like from the beginning, I would say my focus has always been, before I even knew about Web3, like I was always upset with how centralized and walled off, social media was. And gravitated towards like, why is this not just like an open protocol rather than, permissioned thing? I didn't know that Web3 social was kind of where I was going to end up, but like looking back, it was, clear that was where it was all like leading to.
You mentioned a day job before. Before I go into all the other questions, what was a day job? I'm curious.
I had a couple of roles in early stage startups. Like my first role, like straight out of university, I worked up to at least head of marketing at a SaaS company, software as a service in Silicon Valley. That was like pure marketing stuff. Then my next job was another Silicon Valley SaaS company, but this time I kind of bargained in the interview that I didn't want to just be doing pure marketing, because I actually was really just interested in writing code and doing product side stuff. And so they said, well, we know what you're good at, so let's like take you on at least for the marketing, with possibility to work on, development stuff that supports the marketing. Over time, I kind of became the, head of growth, analytics implementer / like, customer implementation engineer for this. It's a small company, so we kind of, all did a lot of different things. But generally my most recent role before I left to join the RWV ecosystem was a growth engineer. So I would be coming up with ways that we could get the product adopted by users, and then running like code experiments, like as to, change the front end in this way, or like do this and talk to the users like this, and etc. In a way where if I were to just have marketing skills, I wouldn't actually be able to carry those things through to the final stages. I was able to like, come up with the idea and implement it on the front end, and measure the analytics that I'd implemented as well. So that was the kind of the role that I was in, that sort of work.
Before you started to do, for Web3 project, have you done any community management work? The reason I ask is that I noticed that a lot of the times the journey for a lot of CEOs in Web3, especially when it comes to social media, social networking, and this is was my journey as well, is starting with like community management and going to CEOs, and it looks like it works really well as well in a lot of cases. That's why I asked.
Yeah, I was terrified at interacting with end users. I always kept myself at a distance with it, and to be honest, in a B2B SaaS role, all I really had to do was it was kind of abstracted. You would interact with companies and whoever represents them. It wasn't very much a community thing, and actually it was a system shock coming into Web3, because it's entirely community. It's like everything's B2C, even if it's B2B. That was really different, and it made me like completely like rethink as to how things work. What I was used to, which was getting adoption via maybe like SEO or like search marketing, these things are all like completely out of the window. It's like, what Discord is this person in, and what like thing are they looking to, like, how are they looking to farm this protocol, right? It's like totally different.
It's really like interesting that you talk about it, because I think those questions have changed like over the space of the last like 10 years, but have they remained the same in terms of the community and the social aspect of field, or, of blockchain. Blockchain is communication, right? So it's not a surprise that it's all built around the communities, but absolutely. Like I also noticed that, and I think that it's really cool though that you spoke about journalism and everything like that, because I think that's what this industry is missing a lot. It's like really a place where I'm not against all like, content creators kind of thing, but there is a specific field in blockchain, in crypto industry, of content creators that seem to go kind of one way and talk about prices and stuff like that, instead of talking about journalism.
Definitely. I was completely like, I just had an intuition that when we started our Weave News, that is not what it should be about. Because when you've got more to talk about than price, as in like, look at this amazing piece of infrastructure that does things that has never been able to be done before, you don't really need to talk about price. Price is almost like a crutch for project that might just be an EVM fork that can't offer anything else.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, I absolutely agree. Let me go a little bit. I mean, I do have questions, but the thing is, in your intro, you said some kind of things which I noted down, and I was like curious about. You mentioned decentralized social media, and this is, to my ears, are a very touchy-feely subject that I would love to ask you some questions about, because I have some experience with that. I have had a personal experience in 2016 with launching a fork of Steemit. The first fork of Steemit, the first and the only official fork of Steemit, because then they open sourced the code was always open source, but the block, the Genesis block wasn't MIT. Sorry, not MIT. It wasn't open license. And then when we did the fork, it wasn't open. And after we did the fork, they completely open. But anyways, not the point. The point was the question to you. And the question to you is, how do you find the journey of creating the decentralized social media? Because from what I have experienced and from what I have seen over the last, like, let's say 10, 11 years, that for now, I internally don't have a feeling that it's possible to create with the infrastructure and the tools that are in place today. What do you think?
Yeah, there's loads of different points there. I mean, with the infrastructure and tools part, so you see there being issues even for like Lens, which is a big one, right? They exist on Polygon. Even with Polygon being as fast and cheap as it is, it still needs like this centralized relay piece in order to make it so that you don't have to sign a transaction every single time that you post something or like something, or like, do a micro interaction that would, need blockchain confirmation. So from that perspective, like a lot of the existing models of Web3 social are just like more of a difficult thing to do than to use Twitter. I think people are very conditioned to how simple their social media apps are. And so if you're trying to add something into it, which could be any level of friction, and then try to push it off to a mass market, then it becomes really just too much friction to bear to switch when there is something as good out there already as Twitter. And so that's the reason why we both took an infrastructure first approach, and also why we took a DAO specific approach. And so the way that I'm seeing a lot of DAOs operating right now is that they do their communication and collaboration in Web 2 and their actual proposals and all of that sort of stuff in Web 3. And I'm not going to name ecosystem names, but there are some where having your DAO discussions on Web 2 puts the transparency at risk. So it's actually possible for moderators to hide threads and comments. It's possible for the trail of history to get lost and for it to, just kind of become a black box, when really it should have all been happening on chain in the first place. And so what Arweave enables is you're able to store a huge amount of data very cheaply on chain forever. That's perfect for DAO tooling. And so there is a tool on Nia called AstroDAO, which is a very typical bare bones, robust DAO tooling thing, setting proposals, reaching quorum, doing token votes, all of that kind of thing. But it doesn't have a conversation feature or any kind of user identity pieces to it. It's like wallet addresses, votes. Did it execute? Did it not? And so what we're trying to build at Decentland is something which could hook into that, or it could hook into any other kind of DAO tooling piece like that, which is going to be able to provide a on-chain decentralized discussion feature with identities, with all kinds of different features which could tack into, just the basic mechanism of proposal to add more, I guess, reliability to it because it's on chain, also to add more color to it because you can discuss, etc. So I think that is the niche in social that we're attacking. It's not trying to make a new Twitter. It's more trying to make infrastructure which existing dApps that need that on-chain feature for their social can plug in and take advantage of.
Absolutely, because like I have been also part of a team, and I'm still as a Citizen Cosmos, as a validator and as an ecosystem developer. We still help that team, another team out. They're not building social tools or social infrastructure, And I don't want to like shield that at all, but the idea was that they have something similar to Twitter already kind of working, but in Web3. And that thing is not really used by people because people are terrified. I mean, it's really extreme as well. It's like kind of the thing you have to use with a ledger. It's super extreme. Like you have to tweet with a ledger. So like it's cool, but it's extreme. And obviously people don't go that way. So I absolutely understand what you get in it there. I have a question for you as to, before we go in a little bit deeper into all of the discussion, what is your opinion on, I mean, if we were to abstract right now from the state of Web3, right? I mean, we already kind of been like talking about it. What is your opinion on the current state of the whole social infrastructure and media? I mean, obviously this is why we're here, and obviously you're not happy with it, but if you can elaborate on what you really think about what's happening in the Web2 world, I mean, and what's your opinion on all that big subject?
Yeah, I'd say, just right now, social media is pretty much controlled by 5 or so companies, all of which use closed source, non-interoperable protocols and make a living off of locking people in and hiding information away. It's completely the antithesis of what the internet was supposed to be. Even, the original, as clunky as it is, like protocols that powered emailing at least talked to each other, at least could have data retrieved from different, user interfaces or whatever. Now, even in the last few years, it's got worse. Twitter has shut down API access, which means you can't get third-party clients. I don't know whether Facebook ever had anything like that, and neither did the rest. I mean, Instagram has always been very locked down from the start. It's their business model, really. Medium, that went haywire as well, prioritizing paywalled content, making it so you can only read a few free articles a month. All of this kind of thing. They're realizing that if you don't want ads, which nobody wants, then you need to start locking things down, which can be a really great revenue model for some creators, but I don't think that it should apply to the whole of the internet. What I was really interested in, and didn't realize that I was kind of having Web3 tendencies at this point, was Mastodon. Back in, I think, around 2017 or something, I discovered it. And I thought, okay, this is actually really amazing because it's built on the ActivityPub protocol, which is like this. It's a standard. It's a app agnostic standard. Instead of being interoperable with itself, you can create all kinds of different apps on it. So there's like Mastodon, and then there's like Pleroma, I think, which is like it's a different app with different everything. But you can still like pull Mastodon posts into it, and you can vice versa. You can have one identity that's consistent across both. Just from the ground up, it's a much more scalable and sane way of doing things. Companies want to make incompatible standards just because it benefits them, because it locks you on the platform. And so that's kind of my take on the whole of the internet almost nowadays. The incentives in Web2 are anti-user, and they're making it very difficult on purpose to build things which users might want, whether they want to expand, whether they want to filter the thing, make a different UI for it. Even something as simple as literally making a Twitter that has a different UI is like made deliberately difficult, because then that means that you could hide ads on the platform, or then that means that you could change the algorithm in a way that might not be favorable to Twitter HQ, etc. And you just, you get lost in that. And the apps themselves are dictators almost.
And I think end of the day, like the problem is for the content creators who are like myself, for example, who are not curious, but because I'm not curious in Web3, I work in Web3 and for many years. But, for me, what I realized that I still have to use like 85 to 90% of Web2 tooling, because either I'm sacrificing, because this is what we have been talking about. Yeah, Web2 is fucked, fucked to completely fucked. But today, I have no idea how to get my message across to my target audience without using Web2 tools. Like, it's just literally impossible, in my opinion. And I've tried for years, and I've been putting some of the citizens of Citizen Cosmos on IPFS and Retrievable on IPFS for a while. Then I stopped. And then I used like different tools here and there, and I've tried. But what I came to realize is that end of the day, if you today are a podcast and you're not using, all your aggregators, you're not using, YouTube, for God's sake, I mean, or something crazy like Even stupid like Instagram, which I've never had Instagram in my life as a person. But then I realized that I have to ask my marketing team or the person who's helping with marketing to create it. It was like, whoa, that's a shot in the head, because you're really, like you said yourself, you feel uncomfortable because you kind of like, hey, I'm kind of talking about this, but then I don't know, like, what do you think about it? Do you think it's appropriate for projects that try to, let's use that scary word, shilling, to shill Web3 to use Web2 tools? Or do you think that we should all move to Web3 tomorrow? Fuck how difficult those products are. What's your opinion there?
Yeah, well, my opinion is, unfortunately, it's where the audience are, and it's probably where the general audience is going to be, because it's just where you expect information to find. Like, you expect to find information on Twitter, therefore you post it there expecting other people will find it there. I get my podcasts on Spotify, but that's also different because I don't really know where those podcasts are hosted. They could actually be hosted on Permacast. They could indeed be secretly Web3. RSS feeds are one of the last bastions of decentralization that the internet has. Everything else has been made proprietary and locked down. But yes, I think podcasting is like, it's still relatively decentralized. You can get your content wherever. And so for audio, I think that the state of things is pretty good. For video, I mean, there is PeerTube, there is Odyssey, there are these kind of very niche, self-hosted or decentralized services. But really the killer is, do they integrate with Web2? Do they integrate with where my audience already knows? Right now, I don't think that there are many people in the world, if any, where the majority of their audience knows them on Web3 only. And that's really, nothing like that is going to happen for the next decade or something, when you get your killer apps where people really can get more value, whether it's monetary or whether it's attention-based value off of posting on Web3 purely than on Web2. But there are lots of stuff where it's like this, Lens, Twitter Bridge. We do imports on Permacast, so you can import all of your existing RSS feed stuff onto Permacast and then, switch the RSS feed URL over so it's using something decentralized, but then it's delivered through all these different Web2 clients. And the Web2 clients for now are a must-have. It's just too ingrained right now. Like, until super mass adoption, end-user focused things come through, then that's just the reality, I think. But it doesn't mean we can't use better infrastructure to actually hold the stuff.
This is actually like a good point about infrastructure. And you mentioned before, in my opinion, a crucial part of the infrastructure, but I seem to have a different opinion from what other people have to have. And what I wanted to ask you about is DIDs, decentralized identities, right? And I've had numerous guests on, and all the guests that I have that talk about decentralized identities, I like to ask one question, and hence I would like to ask you as well. Do you think that, considering we're talking right now about decentralization of infrastructure a little bit, right? And we're touching on like such big things. Do you think that a pair of private public key then could be more than enough to have an identity, and you don't really need more than that? You have a private key and a public key. We have cryptography. They match. Fantastic. We don't need anything else. Why, or rather is, let me ask you the question, why do we need anything beyond that? Why is there a need for a lot of infrastructure to create a bigger identity than just a private and a public key?
Yeah, that's a great question, because, like, for one, you've got no lack of metadata in a private public key pair, which means no universal way for a DApp to know who you actually are. They maybe know your wallet address, which is fine, but they maybe don't know your username, your bio, etc. And then another thing is that private public key is, well, I imagine from the way that you're describing it, locked to one chain only. Right now, at least, this might be funny point to make in 10 years' time when things are a bit more chain agnostic. Right now, we split our Web3 lives across multiple different chains. I have history and assets and identity on a whole ton of different chains. I've got my arweave.ar name, I've got my .eth name, I've got NFT holdings on Nia, my .nia name. All of these things are scattered all over the place. And if I want to use my DID, even just in any kind of sense of the word, on one of those chains, it doesn't reference my full existence on other chains. And that's just a fundamental flaw and also like an actual technical flaw. If I were to want to do token voting with my ETH CryptoPunk on Near, or if I were to want to join a guild that requires a certain amount of tokens and the guild's, DApp was hosted on a chain that doesn't even know what my private public key pair means on another app, right? It's all non-interoperable again. And so I think I've got just a general problem with things that are not like built to be interoperable with other things, like, iPhone chargers. Like that's a stupid, simple example. But it's almost like what a lot of things are. And while Web3 protocols are built to be composable, or at least they very much should be, you've still got the issue of what chain is it on? Oh, okay, it's on this chain. Well, then it's not composable with 90% of the world, of the Web3 world. That would be my thesis of why it's not enough to have just that. You can have a protocol on top of that. So Arc protocol, which is a decent land identity attestation protocol, is a way to take your Arweave private public key pair, just your Arweave address, and use that as the master key for all of your other things as well. So attached to my Arweave address on my Near address, my Ethereum address, my address on Evmos, and as such, all of my asset holdings are able to be verified back to my key on an account which actually would not be able to otherwise talk to those chains. So it is enough, but it does need something to resolve those, that metadata, so that it can be broadcast between apps which might not otherwise be interoperable. Otherwise, we kind of end up with silos everywhere again. And the reason why I said this is funny is, in the I guess late 90s, there was like wars over which database technology things use. Like, do you use like Postgres? Do you use MySQL? Do you use Cassandra or whatever? Like, maybe that is going to be as like nerdy as blockchain wars are right now. Like, does it matter like what base layer this data lives on? It might not in the future, or it really might. Like, it depends on who wins.
I think we will see a lot more things we don't expect when it comes to database wars and to, database decisions, let's so to call them. I think we still have something to see there that we haven't. But to go back to you, to play a little bit devil's advocate, you said, the problem with public and private key pair is technically not having metadata. And, let's say I have one identity account on Ethereum and then another one on Monero. They're not the same. Now, the question I have to use, and let's go back to the iPhone chargers. And okay, don't get me started on iPhone chargers. I personally prefer Android, but I do have one iOS device. And it's really annoying because that iOS device has a separate charger. And if I don't have the charger, then I cannot charge it. And when I forget it, it's a pain in the ass. But that iOS device is still a separate device that has its own existence and has its own kind of like a digital soul, so to speak. And what I'm trying... Yeah. Just to be devil's advocate, what I'm trying to say here is that, like, okay, so we have all those identities on all, it's like hallucinations, right? That happen in my head. Is it real or not? Well, my brain says it's real. It says it happened. And, well, lately, like, if you look at, like, all the psychological studies of DSM-5, you will see that it is now not considered unreal. It's considered real now, those things, because, hey, they happened. The person experienced them. So being devil's advocate, my question is, well, all those separate silos and all those separate accounts and all those separate chains, well, they are real, aren't they? Even if they're run by the same person, they have an identity, they do something. Why cannot they be considered real? Why do they have to be combined into one account? Why does it have to be one identity that says, those are all my accounts? Why cannot those accounts exist as separate organisms?
Mm-hmm. No, they for sure can, and in a way where I have 4 different Twitter accounts, in a way where I would want that to be the case. Even that totally makes sense. But in a case where, say, you have a niche chain, like here is a really concrete example as to why this maybe doesn't need to go as philosophical as that, because it already has technical need to exist. So an example is there is a NFT collection on Aurora, which is a EVM, I guess it's an EVM-like, EVM-compatible contract that lives on the Near blockchain. And those cannot actually talk to each other apart from on a really low level. So if I own an NFT on Aurora, Nia doesn't know that I own that, and it can't know. And so the DAO tooling on Nia is unable to take my Aurora NFT and use it as a membership criteria for this DAO. So now if I decide, right, well, I want to associate my Nia account with my Aurora EVM address so that I can use this token as an access pass to this DAO on Nia, then I can using something like that. Now, obviously, the choice is up to the user as to whether they decide to attest that they own this. But it definitely has like, technical underpinnings rather than this sort of idea that you said of like maybe identity separation or something like that. That's completely valid as well. And I agree with it. It's like, it's all up to the user's choice. Like we don't use this to detect who you are between chains. We use it to facilitate somebody wanting to attest to who they are.
Absolutely. I love the bird sounds, by the way. No, this is, I really do. I like, is it like, are you someone next to nature? This is like a serious question. This is not a joke question. It's not? I thought it was a bird. It's not a bird?
It's not all birds. I'm signing my them and this
lovely.
In the distance.
It's lovely, but it's lovely. So a question that I have to you, the next question is, and this is something you mentioned, and in Cosmos, in my opinion, this is a very big discussion, considering Cosmos is all about interoperability, about function and interoperability, which is a big surprise, I think, to everybody, even to everybody who was following Cosmos for years. When it started working, IBC, everybody's like, oh my God, it actually does work.
Really? I'd love to go detail on that. My Cosmos history is patchy.
Oh, we can talk in detail on that, but before we do, like you mentioned something really cool there, which in my opinion is really important and relevant to Cosmos today. And I'm sure that everybody who is cosmonaut and listening to us will relate to that. You mentioned governance threads, and you mentioned projects that use, and this is in my opinion atrocious. In my opinion, to be able to use, not to be able, but to still use things like, but anyways, let me ask the question and then you voice the opinion, because I really want to understand what you think about this. So we spoke about, the difficulty of using Web3 tools when, Web 2 kind of offers a much easier solution, but at the same time, we want to target the audience, which is on Web 2, so that's why we're using Web 2 still. So the governance is kind of in a way the same, but it's not, because those users are already aware of Web 3 tools. They're already aware of what on-chain discussion can look like, and in Cosmos it exists. And still, people keep on not just using forums and other tools to discuss governance, but they insist on that. In fact, I've seen chains making proposals, like an on-chain proposal to say, let's go and use this Web 2 to discuss our governance. And if you don't use it, we will not consider you part of our community. And you're like, what the hell are you doing, guys? Can't you see that this is really a step backwards? And this is my question. I know I'm kind of being loud and opinionated about this right now, and I guess I have been a little bit today, but still, what's your opinion on all that? Is that, in your opinion, okay in order to get people who cannot use Web3? But it's a bit strange because, well, they already are Web3 users, right? So what's your opinion here?
I think we might be in a strange transitory period where early software developers in the 70s making operating systems and they, enforce that things need to be sent over mail. So put this to me in writing. There were very much Linux magazines or Linux zines with things. It wasn't all done online immediately. And I would say it's probably just this adoption barrier of, we want to get the incentives of the thing. So we want to get people involved in this forum. We want them to engage in it as much as possible. So let's use the easiest thing with the least friction so that we'll get the highest turnout on this proposal, so we'll get the best user engagement. It purely, to me, speaks to the fact that these Web3 tools are not ready yet to take on to basically be an analog to these, to the Web3 solutions. It might be anything from slow UX to it costs me a few pennies to post my comment, whereas it would cost me nothing otherwise. One possible solution is the exact opposite of what you mentioned, where instead maybe protocols should enforce that things are done on chain instead of trying to get people off chain onto Web 2 things. It might just be a matter of the leadership needs to take a stance of like, let's get this on chain, just the same way they took a stance to say, let's get this off chain. But yeah,
Absolutely.
that's kind of my diagnosis of it.
I think it should personally definitely go. I mean, there was the whole Aave talk, right, on Ethereum recently about decentralized front ends, and yeah, I'm absolutely all for it. I think
yeah, me too. Me too. I mean, that's really all I can say. All I can say is it should be done in a way where the data is able to be pulled into any front end. It all kind of comes back to these shared, publicly accessible protocols, rather than having some tool own the data on a database somewhere.
we kind of like a little bit harsh, I guess, about decentralization in the last like 40 minutes. Do you think that decentralization is a spectrum, or in 10 years time, everybody must be decentralized, or is that even a decentralized thing to say that everybody should be decentralized? I mean, what's your take on that?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think it's, again, sort of like having to look at the incentives of the thing. So I'm not sure, if you're a corrupt DAO, you might want to be able to hide people's comments in the forums. But, in general, there's a huge necessity, decentralized finance stuff. That's why that blossomed so early. There was nothing like it previous to that. There is social media still, and the fact that it's decentralized is almost hidden from the user. There's no obvious benefit. It's not like now I don't have to go through a bank to do my things. Now I can just like do it with a wallet on my laptop. I could go on Twitter on my laptop, or I could go on a decentralized social media thing on my laptop. So it's sort of like the incentives of it. People maybe aren't quite there yet, like on the adoption curve, in order to like fully see the benefit of like my history lives forever on chain. Or this is as transparent as it possibly could be, with no tampering able to happen, etc. Yeah, so I think there's still going to be stuff that is centralized, probably always. Like, I imagine just for like legal reasons, stuff like Spotify and Netflix may well always be, just because you can't have that content, publicly available because it's a copyright infringement. But there are some arenas of the internet that could be far more decentralized than they are and should be.
I have one question. You mentioned the word incentives several times. I'm one of those people who believes that incentives are kind of inbuilt into the, we have the reward cycle, and if you don't have the reward cycle, you will be just an amoeba, you will be a plant. So it's kind of inbuilt into us. And I think one of the biggest issues that I told you, I was part of a team as early as 2015-16 to launch the decentralized social network, an experiment, and the biggest issue in my opinion, to till today with social networks, is the economical and the incentive side. How do you guys solve that? What's your approach on that matter in terms of economy behind all that and incentives?
Yeah. So as far as the actual, so for permacast, I can give you a straight answer. For Decent Land, not so much. So for permacast, what we do is we do a system where the amount that you spend uploading an episode is dropped back to you in our native token relative to the amount that you spend. So it is possible to earn back either the same, less, or more, depending on the token price at launch, than you were to have uploaded. That is one of the incentives, essentially earn to decentralize, earn to upload. And then also we plan on, further than that, having token economy basically within that, where if you buy somebody's NFT episode using these tokens that you get from uploading, then it could be something like you get access to like a private, feed of that podcast or something like that. And so that kind of gives it an economy in there. Now, Decent Land is definitely more difficult, because what you don't want is people doing incredibly low cost actions repeatedly and just basically farming the protocol in order to get tokens out of it. It has to be based on quality. And so I'd say that's an unsolved question right now.
Well, don't worry about it, man.
Yeah. One incentive that we have for Decent Land is actually ANS, which is our We've Named Services, .ar domains. So, I'm sure you're familiar with .eth domains. They expire, and they really, the incentive to hold them is because you hope to sell them at a later time. Now, what we have with ANS is a different kind of incentive mechanism. So say I mint Benjamin .ar, that is then, written into the blockchain that I own this particular string of characters. Somebody comes along and mints like Benjamin 1 or Ben or Jam or any of these sort of substrings within it. A portion of the minting fee would be attributable back to the original owner of that substring based on, how close of a match they are. So you're incentivized to hold your username in order to accrue these percentages of minting fees back off of new mints as well. So this is kind of identity incentives rather than social incentives that we were talking about here. On the social incentive side, now actually what we've realized we've more created is almost like a disincentive for bad behavior, like slashing around the social thing. So on the social model, in Decentland, it's possible to create a token-gated community where you would need to own a particular NFT from a collection, maybe even filtered by traits, in order to get into this community on Decentland. But to be a moderator of that community, you would need to be staking tokens on that community's contract in order to continue being able to moderate it and to keep it open. And so what this creates is a disincentive from kind of like rash, hand of God, Reddit style moderation that could actually help, keep more of a balance in these decentralized communities. Because, I referenced Reddit, the moderators are able to, basically run wild with their power. And the same with Twitter, you can get suspended and you have no recourse. Say enough people get suspended from a particular Decentland community, they have recourse to be able to vote to slash that moderator and reshuffle the governance and take a vote as to who should actually be the moderator. And so there's kind of a built-in rebellion mechanism for these kinds of communities. Now, as for the actual incentive to do that, I mean, we hope that it is so that you can use the tooling rather than so that you can get money. And yeah, I mean, obviously there is still more thinking to be gone into that, but that is one of the core things that will be there as far as like the token economics of it.
From perspective of a person who has been around it for the last like several much more years, I think you're on the right track. I think that I'm surprised the things that you're saying, for example, NFT episodes or, moderator tokens. This is things that, in my opinion, are like make common sense. And I'm surprised that I haven't seen those implemented on a big scale yet. I'm really am like, it just makes perfect sense in my opinion, what you say. So, Benjamin, there is one more small thing I wanted to ask you about before I go into the Blitz, which was about storage and IPFS and Arweave. And my question is, why Arweave and why not IPFS?
Yeah, sure. So as we know, IPFS is free. That makes it a pretty attractive option for many, many use cases. But I don't know whether many people do know, but it's not there's no incentives for the host to keep it around. It's almost like you're asking a stranger and holding them on mutual trust that they're going to keep your files. The incentives, again, are very important. And there is essentially, for IPFS, I believe, no incentives. In the case of Arweave, what we have is a 200-year guarantee of data availability based on the amount of people who are currently mining R. People who are mining R token, they have these huge rigs with multiple terabytes of space. They store the whole blockchain multiple times on their machines, and they are incentivized to be able to quickly provide the piece of data that you want when you ask them for it. When you pay for storage on Arweave, you slightly overpay, and the slight overpay goes into a wallet called the endowment fund. And the endowment fund, where I get 200 years from, is that if nobody ever uploaded anything to Arweave ever again, there would be enough money to incentivize miners to keep mining for 200 years, at least, at all times. Now, that was the figure from a while ago. I've heard 500 years, 1,000 years now, as Arweave keeps growing. So, essentially, what it creates is a, cryptographic assurance that your data is going to be there. Right now, we have, I think, between the hundreds and thousands of nodes, which all store multiple copies of the Arweave blockchain and are incentivized to do so monetarily, I guess. And even if they were to stop receiving rewards from blocks because the blocks were all empty, they would still receive rewards from the endowment for many, many, many years to come. So that's why I find Arweave to be extremely robust and waterproof. It's like if you were to have an incentive layer on top of torrenting that would keep people seeding because it's making them money.
I see. Makes sense in that case, I guess. I mean, I have questions like when you say 200 years, when you say the amount of money there is at an R token and what would be the cost of R token in 200 years. But I guess that is very speculative and we can discuss this for a long time. And of course, you could change whatever currency you keep in. So I guess it's kind of makes sense. Let me, if you don't mind, like go into the blitz, ask you 3 questions. Feel free to answer them short and quick, like a blitz. So feel free to open the answers up and go into detail. So the first one is, could you give me 3 projects outside of the top 20, preferably, that you are interested in what they are developing and currently and working on?
Outside of the top 20, I don't keep up with rankings. I think around the 30 mark. Arweave around 70 at this point. I'm quite interested in Ton, the Telegram network, because it's got this built-in Web2 identity link to your Telegram username, which we find to be an interesting part of identity.
I've already seen projects. One of the projects I was talking about today, I've seen purchase identity link. It's interesting. I think you guys might have crossings there. Give me 2 things that motivate you to keep on doing what you do in daily life.
My family, very much, and generally the goal of turning things into a protocol rather than a walled garden.
That is actually a very cool answer. I like that. The last one person that you think that for anybody who will, if it's a book, they will read it, or if it's somebody they will follow, that they will benefit in their daily life and will help them to be more concentrated, motivated, more successful on whatever it is they do.
Okay, got it. Yeah. I think there's a book, The Cathedral and the Bazaar. It is a book, I can't remember who it's by. His first name's Raymond. It's a book written, I think maybe 20 years ago, maybe even older, about open source software having inherent benefits, virtues, I suppose it would almost be said, against closed source. The idea basically being that there's a great quote from it, something like, with enough eyes on the problem, all bugs are shallow. Essentially talking about how that once you open source something, once you get the community's eyes on it, problems are basically the solutions to problems that become decentralized. And the problem is one that can be decentralized almost when you take it out of the corporate sphere. The whole thing is kind of talking, the cathedral being something like Microsoft Windows, this huge proprietary impenetrable black box of binary, versus the bazaar, the free trade market of different pieces of software, different components here and there, each of which are, adapted and used, and they have got a lot of eyes on the code themselves, which means, you can more easily debug them, you can more easily reuse them, etc. I think that book has been like one of the most influential to my thinking.
I love it. Absolutely. We'll definitely find it and definitely include it to the podcast notes for sure. Benjamin, is there anything else I didn't ask you that you would like to mention?
I don't think so. I feel like we had a really good, free-form, wide-ranging conversation that's pretty much covered everything that's been on my mind lately as well.
Cool.
Nice job.
Cool. I like hearing that. Thank you, by the way, and thank you for your time, of course, and thank you for joining us. Thank you, everybody else who's listened to the episode and tuned in. Thank you very much. This content was created by the Citizen Cosmos Validator. If you enjoyed it, please support us by delegating to Citizen Cosmos and help us to create more educational content.